Hi, I'm Gareth Green, and in this video we're going to be thinking about the topic of polychords. So what are polychords? Well, this word poly of course means many, so many chords. Well, every piece of music in the universe almost has got many chords in it, but this means when you've kind of got one chord imposed on another. And you might think, well, why on earth would you want to do that? Well, this is one thing we're going to look at. So let's just start with looking at and hearing a polychord. Now, what I've done here is I've got a chord of C major and I've imposed a chord of F major on it. Now, what does that sound like? Now, some people will listen to that and think, well, that just sounds like a dissonant pile of so I'm not going there. Other people will think, oh, that sounds pretty cool. Yeah, okay. So it may be that you're working with music that is kind of open to that kind of approach. It may be that you're in a more traditional place where you just think, well, I've got enough chords to work with without having to pile one chord on top of another. Absolutely fine. But this is what polychords are about. And I know that there are many people out there who say to me, do you know what? I can do what I do, but how do I extend what I do to something a bit more adventurous? And one answer to that is that you could think about polychords. Now, there are composers who are writing pieces of music in bitonality. In other words, they're writing in two keys at the same time, which may seem a fairly crazy concept to some people, or polytonality, where they're writing in a number of different keys at the same time. But polychords is just literally saying, here's one chord, here's another chord. What does it sound like when I put them both together? So I could have a piece of music that starts with this polychord that I've just illustrated. And you might think, actually, that's quite an ethereal sound that I might want to work with. So in a certain context, that might be quite nice. You can imagine that, can't you? In a film score where maybe we're looking at pictures of outer space or something, you know, it's just kind of space music maybe. Could be something entirely else. It could be kind of violent music. You could do something like that. I mean, you can use it in different contexts, and in terms of what you do with a polychord in dynamics or articulation or rhythm, it's going to change the impact of it. So it's not just about, do I like polychords or do I not like polychords? It's kind of like, actually, once I've got used to the sound, well, what are the different ways in which I might want to use a polychord? But this is an example of a polychord where you've literally got a chord of F major imposed on a chord of C major. I've got these in, you know, basic triad positions. You could space those chords in other ways. That's absolutely fine. And there are lots of examples of these kind of polychords. Stravinsky, in his Rite of Spring, for example, has a C major chord, which is kind of spaced out, and then he puts an E flat minor chord on top of it. So you might think C major, E flat minor, got nothing to do with each other, but all this kind of stuff where he's doing that in a quite kind of violent way in the Rite of Spring. So that's a famous example of a polychord. Now, there is another way in which you might look at this chord. Some people might be looking at it and thinking, well, isn't this really a chord extension? Let's think about what we mean by that. If we think about this C major chord at the bottom, you've got C, E, G. So we know that we build chords in thirds. So we have a root, a third, a fifth. So if I extend it, a seventh is B, a ninth is D, an 11th is F, a 13th is A. So by the time you look at that as a C13 chord or a 113 in the key of C major, you can sort of see that I've got C, E, G, and I've got F, A, C. So in fact, what's the difference between C13 and this polychord? I think it's about how the chord actually functions. So if we do what I was illustrating a moment ago, where I'm doing the F major, C major combination, and maybe I'm moving around like that. Well, how is that functioning? It's not really functioning in terms of extended chords, where you have an extended chord that resolves to some chord that follows on nicely from it. I'm just saying, here's the sound of a polychord. Now I'm moving the polychord around. It's not functioning in a conventional way. But have a look at this. Let's look at this possibility here, that we take a 5-13 chord in C major. Let's just check that out for a minute. So if I take a 5-13 chord or a G13 chord, it's going to be like this. G, B, D is the basic chord, root, third, fifth. The 7th is F, the 9th is A, the 11th is C, the 13th is E. So you could say, well, it's a polychord. But at the same time, it could be seen as a 5-13. When we write 5-13s in 4-part writing, we can't put all the notes in, so we tend to have a root, a third, a 7th, and a 13th. And that's what I've written here. So that looks and sounds like a 5-13 chord that's resolving to a chord 1. So you can see how one chord moves to the next. 5-13 to 1. Now in that case, that 5-13 is functioning as an extended chord. I'm going G13 or 5-13 followed by 1. Because that has a function, I think it's quite right to regard this 5-13 as an extended chord rather than as a polychord. However, look at this second example. What have I got going on here? Well, upstairs in the treble clef, I've got F major followed by G major. And downstairs in the bass clef, I've simply reversed that. G major followed by F major. Now, I would suggest that that is polychords because it's not functioning in the way that that 13th chord was onto a chord 1, a tonic chord. We've got one polychord followed by another polychord. And this time, I'm not doing the similar motion that I was demonstrating back there, where both those chords were moving in the same direction. Now, with this version, you see those two chords are switching over, but working in contrary motion. So what we're doing now is we're listening to the kind of evocative sound of each of those polychords, but it's not really functioning. The second chord is not a resolution of the first chord. So that's the difference between an extended chord and a polychord. So some people say, oh, you don't need to worry about polychords. They're just extended chords. Well, at one level, you can look at a polychord and often explain it in terms of an extended chord, but actually the proof of the pudding is in the eating, as we say, which means here it's about, does it resolve, does it function, in which case it's probably an extended chord, or is it one polychord followed by another polychord where the second polychord doesn't resolve the first one, in which case it's definitely a polychord rather than an extended chord. But if you're wanting to expand your compositional horizons, you might want to experiment with using some polychords, and you'll be amazed at what kind of evocative sounds you can generate. And it gets you out of this diatonic box a little bit. In other words, just writing in a key. If you want to do something a little bit more interesting, have a think about polychords. They're well worth investigating. Well, if you've enjoyed this video, let me invite you to an amazing exploration of the Music Matters website, www.mmcourses.co.uk, where we have an incredible range of resources for you. Some of them are free, some of them are things that we ask you to pay something towards. There's courses there, you can join our Maestros program, but we've also got a little link to something called merch. So if you want to buy a t-shirt or a musical cup or something for yourself, or maybe as a gift to a musical friend, it's a great place to go and see what we have there. Some beautiful designs for t-shirts and hoodies and that kind of stuff. Music bag, these little cups that are just ideal. Coffee mugs where you've got the circle of fifths printed on there, or you've got common chord progressions printed. So every time you sit down for a coffee, you can test yourself on your knowledge of the circle of fifths and kind of get to know all the keys, or you can kind of rehearse chord progressions that work really well for you. So it's got great value as well as being very functional as a coffee mug. Anyway, lots of things on there for you to have a look at. So if you're wanting to buy something for yourself or buy a musical gift for a music teacher or a musical friend, there's something that's got its own kind of unique brand as a Music Matters project. Simply click on merch and you'll find your way there very quickly. www.mmcourses.co.uk